We're four friends with hot takes on food media.
And we're here to review and recap all kinds of food shows in bite-sized seasons.
Plus, virtual potlucks, cooking adventures, and food memes.
Welcome to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Happy Earth Day. And welcome to another exciting Reddit talk here on our food. Like I said, I'm Meg and Justine is Mixtape Montage and we'll be your hosts today. We're also the hosts of Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes, a podcast where we review and recap all kinds of food shows in bite-sized seasons. You can find us on your favorite podcatcher. And today it's our absolute pleasure to welcome Erin Gleeson as our guest. Hello, Erin.
Hi, how are
Erin,
you?
Doing great. Erin is the Forest Feast up top. And that's a very appropriate name because Erin is the New York Times bestselling cookbook author and artist behind the lifestyle brand, The Forest Feast. After working in New York as a food photographer, Erin left the city for a cabin in the woods, which took her work in a whole new direction. Inspired by local California produce, Erin has now created 5 vegetarian cookbooks and a line of products that showcase her unique blend of photography overlaid with beautiful watercolor illustrations and hand lettering. Erin Gleeson's latest cookbook, The Forest Feast Road Trip, was just released on March 22nd. It's described as a love letter to travel and delicious vegetarian food from Erin's home state of California. So for today, we're going to be talking about the Forest Feast Road Trip Cookbook. Also, you may have noticed, Redditors, we had a cook-along a few days ago in the subreddit, and some of you may have made Erin's pumpkin deviled eggs or the rosé Spritz. So we want to hear your feedback on that if you want to talk about those recipes or any other recipes from the cookbook. And also, today is Earth Day, so we're excited to talk about that too. So here's how this works. For the next hour, we're doing a live AMA, essentially. To ask a question to Erin, you need to log on to the Reddit app, join this talk, and raise your hand. You raise your hand by clicking on the little raised hand icon in the lower corner. Then if you receive an invite to come up on stage, please accept that invite. And when prompted to do so by one of us, go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. You can mute and unmute yourself by tapping on the microphone icon. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible. So let's get started. Justine, I think you had a question for Erin to get us started here.
Yes, in celebration of Earth Day and Erin. So your recipes are inspired by local, seasonal California produce. Can you tell us a little more as to why thinking local is important when it comes to home cooking?
Yeah, of course. So kind of the basis for all of my recipes and the inspiration has been my CSA farm box that I get delivered every week. CSA means community supported agriculture. So it's sort of like a subscription box, and I have 8 items a week, and I get to actually choose them, but they all come from farms that are within an hour or two of me. And I see that as a way of supporting local farms and local farmers in my community, and also getting really healthy in-season produce, which it's always more flavorful if it's in season, I find. And I think a CSA subscription box, not only does it give the farmer some regular income, but as a consumer, it's also a little bit more affordable than buying all of my produce at the farmer's market. So I do still supplement with stuff from the grocery store and stuff from the farmer's market, but I just try to use as much fresh local produce as possible. I think it tastes better and it's good for my community.
I love CSA boxes. They're the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just a reminder to everyone who's listening, you can ask Erin your question by hitting the raised hand icon. So much of your work is inspired by nature and the seasons, and it seemed like you were pretty excited that our talk today was going to be on Earth Day. So what does Earth Day mean to you, or do you celebrate Earth Day in a particular way when it comes to cooking?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific dishes that I make every year or anything like that. But to me, Earth Day is just about kind of spending some time in nature, taking a walk outside, thinking about what I can do that might be better for the environment. Just this morning, we were talking about like little things like, oh gosh, we need to remember to like take our bags, our reusable bags to the grocery store and stuff like that. But I feel like so much of what I do in sharing vegetarian recipes, a lot of my motivation for kind of sharing vegetarian ideas is because I think it's not only healthy for our bodies, healthier for us, but it's also healthier for the planet to eat vegetarian more often. I don't think you have to go full vegetarian to make an impact. I think just even a couple meals a week can totally make a difference. So for me, being vegetarian and Earth Day, they're very much intertwined.
Another question for you, Erin. Who taught you how to cook, or are you self-taught?
Good question. Yeah, so I am self-taught. I mean, I feel like I've learned so much from my family and my friends over the years. But I started out actually as a food photographer, working in the kitchen, taking photos with a lot of big chefs in New York City. And I feel like I did learn a lot just by watching them. But I did not go to culinary school. I went to art school. So I feel like my approach to recipes is very visual. I think I'm sort of a visual learner. And for me, it kind of makes sense to see the recipes in diagram form. So in my books, the ingredients are sort of laid out visually, and you can see little watercolor illustrations that I do laid over the recipe page. And each page is full color. The recipe page is a travel photo in the background. And I always, if you can imagine like a landscape at the bottom with a lot of sky. In the sky, I'm overlaying my text and my handwriting and my watercolor illustrations of the ingredients used, and some text that tells you how to make each recipe. But it's sort of like a diagram. It's a visual way of cooking, which makes sense in my head a little bit more than reading a lot of text. And I try to just keep things really, really simple, like fewer than 5 ingredients often. And I think, that's very much because I'm a home cook, and I make simple recipes. Everything's very produce driven. And I think because I come from an artistic background, everything's super colorful. So I'm always thinking visually, when I was starting out, I wanted things to be really colorful for the photos that I was taking. But then in making dishes myself, I wanted to kind of think of each plate as like a little sculpture, and trying to think kind of artfully how I could cut things and how I could plate things, and thinking about the colors and the shapes of different produce and ingredients that could go together to make not only the photo pretty, but the experience for me pretty when I'm eating it, or when I'm serving it, or when I'm sharing it with guests or my family or whatever. But I feel like my job is not really to teach people how to cook. There's so many chefs who write books that do that in a different way. And I feel like what I'm offering is some ideas and ways to get started with really simple, colorful, but also flavorful recipes that really anyone can make.
I do think your cookbook is absolutely beautiful. I love the illustrations. I love the hand lettering. It's also beautiful. And you just talked a little bit about how your art background influenced your cooking. Would you say there's a little bit of vice versa? Would you say that your cooking, I mean, obviously you do these beautiful food illustrations, but beyond that, is there anything about the process of cooking or recipe development that you feel like you've applied to your art?
Yeah, I think, like I was saying, I try to kind of treat each plate like a little sculpture. When I was starting out working as a food photographer in New York, I did an MFA in photography, and I had read an article about pastry chef Will Goldfarb, who's gone on to do some amazing things. But at the time, he had a small dessert bar in Soho. And after reading this article, I just like went into his restaurant one night, and I sat at the bar, and he happened to be there. And I asked him if I could kind of come in and shadow him and take photos for my thesis project. And he was into it, and he let me come for a few months. And I watched his creative process, his desserts. He was into molecular gastronomy, and all of his desserts were these very elaborate and beautiful creations on the plate that were based on dreams or trips he took. And he was very interested in texture and color and how the different ingredients work together. And I just found the whole process so creative and so fascinating. And I had so much fun kind of photographing that. But I think, what I do is so much simpler. I'm doing a very, very basic thing. But I think that that time with him inspired me to kind of think differently about the shapes and the colors that we put on a plate, and kind of the choices that we make artistically when we're cooking. Yeah. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it absolutely does. I definitely firmly believe that multi-creatives like you, it really is all part of the same part of the brain. So it's really like interconnected, and learning one creative endeavor informs the other. Yeah, that makes total sense. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. And even my books, I sort of treat them as one big art project. I get to do all the parts, which I think is sort of unusual for a cookbook author, but I take all the photos, I do all the illustrations, I style all the photos, I shop for my own props, and I do my own lighting, and I make all the dishes myself, and I even lay out every single page. I lay the text and everything. I come up with the design for each page. I have a designer at my publishing company who then preps it for print, but I really get to have my hands in all the bits, which I find really fun. And I think it's unusual to find a publisher that will let you do everything. Usually there's like a whole team of people that collaborate on a cookbook project. But I think I have sort of a different approach to making cookbooks that's a little bit more artful. They're sort of art book cookbooks. So it's fun for me to do all the creative things that go into it.
We're always trying to be better food photographers ourselves for our Instagrams. So if you have any tips, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, I teach a food photography class at Stanford in continuing studies at Stanford University in Palo Alto. And it's fun. It's really fun to think about food. When I was in New York shooting with lights, kind of like a more studio setup with flashes and umbrellas and stuff. And moving to California, the light here is just so amazing. We live in the Santa Cruz Mountains where it's often foggy. So it's kind of like a big softbox in the sky. But I really shifted to shooting with all natural light. I love shooting kind of at golden hour, that time around sunset when everything looks a little bit warmer outside. If you're shooting with a phone, I suggest shooting overhead or in portrait mode if you have an iPhone. That's what I do when I'm trying to get good results. But I think thinking about the light and the direction that the light is coming from is really helpful. So if you're indoors, I always, when I'm holding the camera, I want to be looking out the window. So my plate of food is kind of being backlit or lit from the side, kind of that Rembrandt side back lighting. So once you have that kind of backlight coming in, you can use either a white poster board or even a white plate, a white napkin, a white piece of paper to kind of bounce a little bit of light back onto the plate. Does that make sense? So you get sort of this backlight with a soft shadow fill in just by holding a piece of white paper there. So I do that a lot, but again, all natural light, no lighting or anything. When I'm shooting with my big camera, I use a Nikon D800, which is actually kind of getting old now, but I shoot everything on RAW. RAW files have a lot more quality to pull from. I edit in Photoshop mostly. And then the lens, I think, that you choose really, really can define how good your photos are going to look. So this is my 5th book, the road trip book. And this one, I used 2 different lenses. My primary lens was a Nikon 24-70 zoom lens, but it goes to f2.8. So you get that kind of like blurry background, dreamy look. But it zooms wide and close up, and not super close, not like a macro, but that's kind of my primary lens. But the other lens that I've used that's much more affordable, and I've used it for, I think, my first 3 or 4 books. I think the 4th one I started to use the bigger lens, but my main lens is, it costs like probably $200, but it's just a fixed 50 millimeter lens. It goes to f1.8, so you can get a really blurry background, but it's an affordable lens that makes everything look great. So if you're starting out with a DSLR camera, look for that 50 millimeter lens. It doesn't zoom, so you have to like get close to the food or get far away from the food, but it's also great for people. It's not the best for landscapes because you can't zoom out really. But yeah, that's sort of what I use.
Awesome. That's very helpful.
So in depth. Love it. Okay, as a reminder to everyone, we are talking to Erin Gleeson of the Forest Feast. And if you would like to ask Erin a question, please raise your hand. Just tap that raise hand icon. Or if you are feeling shy and don't want to join us on the stage, you can leave a question in the comments of this chat. There's a little comment button or right on the AMA Reddit page for this chat, and we will read your questions for you. All right. So Erin, I just want to get this out of the way. This is your 5th cookbook, The Forest Feast Road Trip. Where can people buy this book?
Yeah, it's my 5th book, and all the books are vegetarian, and they're all called The Forest Feast something or other. But all of my books are sold in all places where books are sold. So you can find them on my website, theforestfeast.com. I link to a lot of different places where you can buy them, but most independent bookstores have them. There's signed copies at my local bookstore called Books Inc. in Palo Alto, California. But they're on Amazon, they're at Barnes & Noble. I think they're on the Target website. They're just in a lot of places. So, yeah.
Just everywhere.
Sold, yeah. Anthropology is a big seller of it too. Yeah.
Nice. Charming, if you have a question, please unmute yourself.
I think we just got rickrolled. I mean, it wouldn't be Reddit if we didn't get rickrolled, right? So, Erin, you were mentioning some of your other cookbooks. You have this California-based cookbook. You have your Mediterranean cookbook. Are there any other regions that you have planned to focus on for future cookbooks or any other road trips?
Well, so this is the first time that I've had a book being released where I didn't have a new book deal in the works. So I don't have any plans for any future travel books right now, but I think and I probably will do another book. I'm thinking of doing a vegan book. So the first 5 are vegetarian, and they all have lots of vegan options, but I've never done a fully vegan book, and it's something that people ask for a lot. So that's something I'm sort of thinking about. Yeah, but the first book that came out in 2014 is The Forest Feast. It was all kind of inspired by moving from New York City to, we were in Brooklyn, and we took a total 180 and moved to a little cabin in the woods. And I really never imagined that my career would shift in a way that like that. I mean, I just didn't even, moving to a cabin in the woods was not even in my realm of thinking. And I never imagined that specific place would lead me to this project. But I just started posting photos of food in the woods that I was taking. And within a year of starting a Tumblr, I got a book deal, which was really fun. So that was all sort of the first book, The Forest Feast, and then we adapted it for kids, The Forest Feast for Kids. And then I did an entertaining book called The Forest Feast Gatherings. So all 3 of those books were very much based on cooking from a cabin in the woods, based on my home in the Santa Cruz Mountains and sort of photos nearby. And then my husband had a sabbatical and we decided to take our kids and go to Europe for 3 months. And that informed The Forest Feast Mediterranean. It was all kind of based in the western part of the Mediterranean, Italy, Spain, France, and Portugal. And we traveled for 3 months and stayed in a lot of different places, ate a lot of different food. And I kind of came home with dish ideas and flavor combination ideas that I saw while eating out and things we saw growing along the way. And I reworked those ideas into vegetarian recipes inspired by our travels. And so the whole book is a lot of photos of those countries and then 100 vegetarian recipes inspired by our trip. And then for this book, this is The Forest Feast Road Trip, and we kind of brought it back to California. So we did a big road trip in the summer of 2019, which is the basis of this book. And we went to 10 different regions of California that I kind of featured in the book. And I also, for the first time, featured the places that we stayed. So we stayed I wanted to take the idea of cooking from a cabin in the woods on the road. And so there's cabin-ish places that we stayed all over. So there's an A-frame cabin in Big Bear, California, and an octagonal cabin in Tahoe. And we stayed on a lavender farm in a small kind of tent cabin in the Eastern Sierras in Lone Pine, California. And we stayed in a yurt on an urban farm in in LA, like downtown LA. It was amazing. So all these different places are the photos of the interiors and exteriors are featured in the book. So that was sort of new and fun to kind of like additional kind of lifestyle and architectural interest to the but there's still 100 vegetarian recipes. So but it's just totally inspired by California. I grew up in California and I camped a lot as a kid. But there were so many places in California that we went for this book that I had never been to, which is so fun to discover for me. Like an example is Lassen. I'd never been to Lassen, which is like northwest of Tahoe National Park. And we saw snow in Lassen in July, which was so cool. I'd never really been to the Eastern Sierras, which was, I found the desert and the colors there so inspiring and beautiful. It also gave me ideas of what to paint when we got back and what illustrations to include in the book. I painted all the 10 places that we stayed, and those are included in the book too.
I am a fan of your cookbook. So I'm vegan and Meg is a vegetarian, and I actually live in LA. I've been living in LA for the past 10 years, and Meg has lived in California herself.
I lived in the Bay Area for 10 years. I love Books Inc. I definitely second your recommendation. I wish I still lived near Palo Alto. I would absolutely take your photography class.
Oh, that's so nice. Thanks.
I have a question from the comments from MJC1672. Hi, Erin. Do you find any particular cuisines that lend themselves to vegetarian meals?
Yeah. I sort of, so many. In this particular book, there's a lot of Mexican-inspired recipes just because California has so much great Mexican food. And I feel like I grew up with the kind of California Mexican food that you see so much around California. So there is some recipes in the book that are inspired by Mexican flavors. They're certainly not traditional preparations. But for example, there's a walnut enchiladas that I'm always trying to look for vegetarian entrees that feel kind of substantial, especially when you're having people over. So the walnut enchiladas have black beans and mushrooms and walnuts as the filling inside the corn tortillas. And then there's a sauce and some cheese on top, but you could not include the cheese or do a plant-based cheese on top, which would be equally as tasty. And but in terms of like a lot of my recipes, I don't even know what to call them. They're kind of California cuisine. I feel very influenced by Molly Katzen and her Moosewood cookbook. She's one of the first authors that I saw who incorporated handwriting and illustration into her cookbooks. And I think her type of cuisine is sort of like that kind of California health food, a lot of grains and lentils. And, I use Bragg's aminos as a seasoning instead of soy sauce often. So, I think, there's so many people doing amazing vegetarian and vegan recipes based on their different cultural backgrounds. And there's just, you can find everything right now, which is so exciting, I think, especially in terms of the ingredients that we can buy and have access to now for vegan and vegetarian recipes. When I was growing up, my family was vegan and, you couldn't buy a veggie sausage or even really very good like veggie burgers in the 90s. And my mom was making everything herself. And now we just have access to so many amazing meatless products that I feel like you can just riff on any recipe you want. So, yeah.
That's awesome. All right. It looks like we have someone on stage to ask a question. Reasonable Self, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Erin your question.
Hi, Raven. I was wondering, I really like vegetables, but I live with a partner who doesn't really. I think outside of broccoli, carrots, and peas, he's not really into any of the other like mushrooms or like other types of vegetables. He's also allergic to tree nuts. And I was wondering if I wanted to incorporate more vegetarian or vegan style cooking, if you would have any advice for bringing someone like that into different type of eating.
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, I feel this all the time with my children. I have 3 kids who also sort of stick to broccoli and carrots, and I'm always trying to get them to eat new things. One of the things that, I think you can always try to like blend things in. So if you're trying to just kind of add more vegetables to certain recipes, like there's a recipe in the book for blender muffins, and you can add a handful of almost any vegetable. They're basically a banana muffin, and they're gluten-free, but you can kind of add a handful of any vegetable, and they always kind of turn out delicious. I know my kids always like them. But in terms of like making vegetables delicious, I feel like maybe your partner hasn't had the best tasting vegetables before. I don't know. Maybe we can change their mind. But the way I think vegetables are most delicious, if you can find the in-season produce, that's bound to be more flavorful than something out of season. And then I roast a lot of vegetables. So I'll take a big baking sheet and I'll put maybe like 4 different kinds of vegetables on the baking sheet and just put olive oil and salt and pepper. That's it. A lot of olive oil. So when you roast it, I roast it at a really high temperature, like 425 Fahrenheit. And I think that high temperature creates like these crispy bits. And I think that like that caramelized crispy corners with the olive oil and the salt kind of makes it even more delicious. So maybe try preparing them that way. Things that I might roast together are like parsnips, carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes, red onions. I might do all of those on one big sheet. You could also throw Brussels sprouts on there. All those items cook at a similar temperature. I think Brussels sprouts are really, really delicious if you cook them at a high heat like that with a lot of oil. They get really crispy. But I think don't skimp on the oil and the salt. Those are the things that make it any vegetable so delicious. But the other way is just cut it up really small and combine it with other items. So say it was like mushrooms. I don't know if you eat like something like Beyond Meat, but we do the Beyond Meat, and I saute it with very small chopped up mushrooms and onions, white onions, so that you almost don't even see it, but also add some garlic in there and just saute it all together. So it becomes this kind of like meaty crumble that's vegan. And then we would fill that in say tacos, or put it on top of a bowl of creamy polenta. We did that the other night with marinara. But sort of maybe introduce new vegetables in combination with another item that they like, if that makes sense. Anyways, hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think cutting up vegetables into smaller pieces is definitely going to be helpful. And then also roasting and caramelizing, I think, for people that were used to eating meat, it definitely resembles that kind of like sweet, like intense flavor.
Yeah. Another one that seems to go over well is cauliflower. It's a recipe in my first book. I think it's called cinnamon cauliflower, but I do all the florets on a big baking sheet, a lot of oil and salt, but I sprinkle chili powder and cinnamon, and I think it's trying to remember, maybe a little cumin, but it's sort of this spice blend mix that is a little sweet and a little savory, sweet just because of the cinnamon, but when roasted at a high heat, the cauliflower, especially when it's in smaller pieces, it gets kind of crispy and it can be really good. I actually combine that also with corn, and I'll use that as a taco filling also.
Thank you for your question. For now, I'm going to ask a question from the comments from Squanton. For someone hoping to eat more vegetarian, how do you have any tips to make the transition?
Yeah, I think first of all, don't worry about it being a big transition. I think it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. Don't kind of like put the pressure on yourself to like make the big shift to being vegetarian. I think just having more vegetarian meals throughout your week is a good start. So I think if you do have a meat meal at some point, I think you should not feel bad about it and not sort of like feel like you've messed up or something. Just like know that it's a process and you don't have to go full on. So there's that. But I think just finding certain meals, maybe you choose a couple nights a week, and, think about the ingredients that you really like. I think when you're starting out, like it's really nice to have like a vegetarian entree. And I do have several in the book, like the enchiladas I mentioned. I also do like a polenta lasagna. So I think like making sure you have something substantial that feels like a meal. So it makes it feel like if you're coming from a more traditional way of eating where there's a really like substantial like main course, finding a vegetarian main can make it really feel like you're having a meal, if that makes sense. The other thing is, I think we, in general, in society, worry too much about protein. And I think as vegetarians, we're getting plenty of protein. So don't worry about feeling like you're not getting enough protein in general. Of course, you should talk to your doctor if you're concerned about anything like that. But I think in general, there's a lot of protein in vegetables, in certain grains like quinoa. Having rice and beans together is a great source of protein, dark leafy greens. So there's lots of ways for you to get the protein. So don't worry about trying to overcompensate in that regard. But also, like I was saying, there's so many, if you're coming from eating like chicken every day or something like that, there's some great brands that are making really good plant-based meats now. So I think just substituting, like if you're used to having chicken and roasted potatoes with salad for dinner, just sub some plant-based chicken. Like I just recently tried the brand Daring. I was surprised how meaty it feels. The texture and everything is very meaty. I thought it was delicious. But yeah, I think just sort of thinking about what is your meat item that you're missing and just putting either a plant-based meat in place of it, or just choosing another item that you really like. So maybe it's not even putting something plant-based there, or something, meat substitute there, but just another item, like a different grain you like, or some beans, or a different type of salad, or some extra fruit. So you're just kind of thinking about replacing that part of your plate with something else that you like. Yeah. And then one more recipe that it's in the Mediterranean book is a tortilla española type recipe where you slice up all the potatoes and you boil or fry them. You mix them with egg, and then you can either bake it or you can do it in a big skillet. But we use that as kind of like a vegetarian entree on weeknights a lot. Yeah, so that's one idea to get you started. That's very simple.
I appreciate those tips since I'm a relatively new vegetarian as well. We are speaking with vegetarian cookbook author Erin Gleeson. She has a new cookbook out called The Forest Feast Road Trip, and we are talking about vegetarian cooking. If you want to ask a question, you can hit the hand icon in the corner of the app to raise your hand, and we will invite you on stage to ask Erin a question. But in the meantime, in the comment section, we have a question from Bees, and they ask, do you think you will do any cold weather forest feasts? I am from Wisconsin and will be heading to live in the woods in a few years and want to learn more about living vegan, currently not vegan, and living off the land.
That's a good question. For cold weather, I know we do live in the woods, and you kind of associate being in the woods with being cozy in the winter, right? But we are lucky in California that like today is one of our worst weather days and it's barely sprinkling. We do get kind of wild, rainstorms. But I spent a lot of time in Vermont, and I really love the kind of woodsy feel of snowy winters and what it's like to cook there. It does tend to make you want to cook more kind of like hearty, cozy meals, especially when the weather is chilly. I don't have any plans to do a book based on a more, perhaps an East Coast wintry location, but maybe at some point. But in terms of living off the land, I think the people who I've seen do that are really good at canning and jarring, big, robust summer gardens that lend themselves towards preserving items for the colder months. I'm not one who likes to can a lot, but I think it could be fun. I would love to have a bigger garden. We have so many redwood trees around us that we don't have a ton of sun. So we have one little garden box in a sunny spot, but I do love the idea of a huge, robust summer garden and being able to save things for the colder months.
Great tips. Erin, this subreddit has so much fun making your pumpkin deviled eggs and rosé spritz. Can you tell us a little bit more about the development of these two recipes?
Sure. Yeah. So if people actually made those pumpkin deviled eggs, I am impressed because I was looking for pumpkin puree at the market this week and it's terribly out of season in California right now. So I couldn't find it. But I've had a deviled eggs recipe in each of my books. I love deviled eggs and I make them all the time. I think they're a great thing to make for parties. They're sort of filling. They're a delicious bite. They feel a little bit special. And you can basically add anything. So yesterday I actually made a variation on the pumpkin deviled eggs. Because I couldn't find the pumpkin, I got a small can of green chilies and I mixed those in to the yolk mixture with mayonnaise and spicy mustard. And I think you can add almost anything. So I've done mashed avocado to make sort of like a guacamole deviled egg. That's in my first book. But you can add a little bit of hot sauce to make a spicy version. You can add pesto to make, I don't know, a sort of herbier version. You can add some tomatoes. You can add more garlic. You can add chopped onion. You can really be creative with it. And yeah, I love me a deviled egg. So if anybody could find the pumpkin and the pomegranate seeds on top. So the pumpkin variation is something that I make every year at Thanksgiving for sort of like an appetizer while everyone's cooking in the kitchen. And the pomegranates, of course, are a pop of color, which I love to see when I'm looking at the platter and serving it. It just looks so pretty with a little bit of paprika, red sprinkle of paprika, plus the little pomegranate seeds. But when you bite into it, it might seem weird to have this like crunchy fruit on top of your deviled egg, but it's actually a really delicious, tart little burst of flavor when you take the bite. So if you haven't tried it, I recommend it. And then the rosé spritz, that's just something that I drink a lot. I feel like that's a lot of the inspiration for the recipes in my books. It's things that I've been making for years or things that I enjoy, and then I do some sort of like variation on it. But in the summer, I love to garden. The photo of the rosé spritz in the book is sitting on my garden bed. And that's because I was drinking a rosé spritz. So it's just rosé wine with a little seltzer over ice. And I do a little dash of bitters just for an extra oomph of flavor. But I was, tending to my little garden bed on a warm summer evening, having a cocktail hour drink. And I have a few edible flowers growing in the garden, and I just kind of plucked one and popped it in. And it just brings so much joy to cocktail hour, right? It's hardly a recipe. It's just an idea, but it's an idea that I think is kind of fun. So the garnish on the drink is an edible flower and also a slice of lemon. But I sometimes do a slice of orange. I think like the citrus adds a nice brightness to the drink. But edible flowers are really easy to grow. I grow nasturtiums. Also, I'm sometimes slow at picking things. So some of the herbs and things will flower. So like right now I have cilantro that's overgrown, but it's got these little flowers on it that are edible. I also have some tomato plants that are just starting to flower, and you can pluck one of those flowers and pop that in your cocktail. So I think anytime I love using edible flowers as much as possible. And also I buy them too. They're actually these days in California anyways, pretty easy to find in the produce section at Whole Foods. They have them in a little plastic box like the other herbs. It's in the herb section, the refrigerated herb section at Whole Foods. But even at my other grocery stores like Safeway, I can just ask the produce department to order edible flowers, and they can usually get them in a day or two. And they're just a few dollars. So, but it's like kind of a fun extra thing. It's also nice to use the edible flowers when decorating a cheese plate. I have a California grazing board with cheeses and other items in this new road trip book. And I have some edible flowers on the side. So just thinking about ways to make it a little bit more joyful, a little bit more colorful, and just kind of fun, and makes it feel special. Even if it's just for you on a weeknight, I think it just makes it a little bit more fun.
I'll confess I suggested that we do these recipes because they looked delicious. And I'm so glad that everyone at Reddit said, yeah, let's do these recipes. I love the contrast in texture with the pomegranate seeds and the deviled eggs. It feels like a very fall recipe. I thought it was great.
No, thanks. I love it.
We have a question in the comment section. This is from a polychur. They ask, do you have any suggestions on foraging, like mushrooms or any other items? You were just talking about getting some fresh flowers from your garden. Anything else along those lines?
Yeah, so this is a question I get a lot. Being called the Forest Feast, immediately people think of foraging, and I am not a forager. I don't know anything about foraging in the woods. The only thing I forage for out there is flowers and greens to put in vases. That's about it. So, yep, I'm not your go-to girl for foraging.
All right, I have a question. So when I was reading through your cookbook, I noticed that you referenced the pandemic a lot. How do you feel that your cooking was influenced, and was your road trip greatly impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, so the first large chunk of road trip that we did was pre-pandemic. It was in the summer of 2019, and we did one large 3-week road trip around California that was 2,500 miles without leaving the state. So California is huge. And so that was and then I had to supplement with a lot of other kind of shorter, long weekend side trips, probably about like 6 to 8 of them, to cover other areas of California that I wanted to include in the book. And a lot of those were taken once the pandemic started. And it was just sort of lucky that, it felt safe and still feels safe, a little safer to travel by car. And also I was pregnant for a lot of the making of this book, and then had a newborn who was born in 2020. Just having 3 kids and traveling in a car was an easy way to do it and explore different places. And yeah, so I think the pandemic was certainly part of it. I think the other sort of nice part is that we spent a lot of extra time at home, and there's a lot. I mean, I always cook a lot, but there's even more cooking since we were all hanging out, having 3 meals a day at home every day. Some of the recipes that I was making a lot did end up in the book, like especially those blender muffins that I mentioned. I was also baking bread like everyone else. We're Jewish, and I bake challah on Fridays. Not today because it's still Passover, but I was doing a lot of baking a lot of challah, making a lot of challah dough. When we were all spending a lot of time at home, and that kind of morphed into some challah cinnamon rolls that are included in the breakfast chapter of the book. And they're a really, really simple bread dough recipe that you can prep the evening before, let it rise in the fridge overnight, and then just bake in the morning when you wake up. And it's sort of a special weekend item that we like to make at home, and it feels very cozy.
Very interesting information. Thank you. We do have more questions in the comments, but if you're tuning in right now, just as a reminder, we are speaking with Erin Gleeson, who is a vegetarian cookbook author. Her latest book is called The Forest Feast Road Trip. If you would like to ask Erin a question about vegetarian cooking or cooking in general, you can raise your hand in the Reddit app by clicking on the raised hand icon in the corner. And when you're invited to the stage, you can ask Erin your questions. But in the meantime, we have a question in the comments from Raven Elephant. Hi, Raven. What is the best way to know what produce is in season where you live and to get in-season produce? Related to that, is it always better to buy fresh and not frozen produce? And for fresh produce, what are some ways I can keep them fresh for as long as possible?
Those are all really good questions. So I think, if you just Google it, you can see what there's like different charts available online that will show you based on wherever you live, what is in season in what months. In California, of course, I'm very lucky to have a lot of things available all year round. Like we get avocados in our farm box pretty much year round, which is crazy. In certain parts of the East Coast or in places where it's a little colder, the winter availability of certain fresher produce is not always as plentiful. But if you just go to your local farmer's market, like the stuff that you see there has been picked recently, and that is in season. So that's one good way to know. It's obviously more confusing at the grocery store because you get stuff shipped in from so many different places. But, while it's nice to eat seasonally, and I think things are more flavorful usually if they're haven't been shipped a long way, and if they've been picked and not traveled too far to you, they tend to be a little bit, things that come from farther away might have been picked a little bit too early, thinking that it would ripen on the way while being shipped to you. So sometimes it's not quite as flavorful if it wasn't picked at a peak time. But I think, I don't know. Can you read me the end of that question again?
Yeah, absolutely. The last part of the question was, for fresh produce, what are some ways that you can keep them fresh for as long as possible?
Oh yeah. Okay. So I use glass jars in the fridge sometimes to store items, or just like the beeswax is a great kind of like sustainable wrapper if you want to put it like in a bowl. I'm thinking like herbs and stuff. Otherwise, just the produce bags that things come, in like the plastic bags, or for herbs and stuff, I will use like a big bag and put some like a fabric napkin in there to kind of absorb some moisture, and put greens in there. One of the greens that I buy most often is arugula, because I think it's more flavorful than a lot of lettuces and I just enjoy it more, but also I think it lasts a lot longer in the fridge. But yeah, I think kind of, for things like say carrots, if you're going to buy them, they last a long time in the fridge. And sometimes I'll just like trim the ends and prep them and keep them in a container. I try to use like glass containers, like Tupperware type containers, and I'll just prep them. And then I think if you just slice them right before you eat them, they're always a little bit more fresh. And I don't peel them either. Like in general, I don't really peel hardly anything. Bananas. I think the peel it has a lot of nutrition in it and it takes extra time, and I just don't bother. So yeah, the peel is just, keep things a little bit more fresh if you're not prepping things in advance. But yeah, like tomatoes, I tend to keep those out on the counter. And I think if you can just buy in smaller quantities so that you eat it more quickly and don't have stuff setting, in your fridge for, more than a week or so, you have better chance at that too. Yeah. Is that helpful?
That was perfect. Thank you. I have another question from the comments from Norwal Ghost. Can you please let us know some of your favorite vegetarian Jewish recipes?
Oh, yeah, good idea. Well, it's Passover right now. I think today's the last day. So we've been eating things like a spinach kugel, which I have a recipe for on my website. Let's see, typically Jewish recipes. The author, Molly Yeh, she has this beautiful brisket inspired dish that is great around the holidays. If I remember correctly, I think it's like a big squash that's almost treated like a brisket. I thought that was very clever for like a high holiday Rosh Hashanah type holiday recipe. Leah Koenig is an author that has written a lot of the big Jewish cookbooks in the last several years. She wrote The Jewish Cookbook and Modern Jewish Cooking, but she has some really great ideas for Jewish recipes and has a lot of vegetarian items. Yeah, I don't know. What are some other things? I like making kind of like a noodle kugel, and I add a lot of veggies in there. I prefer a savory kugel that has like some wilted greens and onions and garlic. But yeah, there's just a couple ideas. If you search on my website, either by Jewish holiday, like type in Passover or Rosh Hashanah, you'll find some ideas. Or just Jewish, search the word Jewish. Some things will come up.
I'm really glad it's going to be lunchtime after this talk. I'm very hungry now. We have another question in the comments. This is from Over Down Yonder. There we go. They ask, "Hi, Erin. What's your favorite cooking show or cooking competition show?"
Oh, good question. I am not really into the competition shows that much. I like them. I just don't really watch them that much. My kids love all the dessert ones. But I've been really enjoying Ranch to Table, which is on Magnolia Network, which is part of Discovery Plus. The host is Elizabeth Poet, and she's actually a friend of mine, and she's actually featured in my book. She lives and grew up on this beautiful ranch in the Santa Barbara Mountains. And we got to go visit her ranch, and we picked apricots with her in her orchard, and some zucchini from her garden, and those items sort of informed a couple of recipes in the book. There's an apricot salsa recipe that I made after picking her apricots. So that's a fun show. Anyways, it's called Ranch to Table. And what are some other ones? I don't know. There's so many beautiful shows happening right now. I feel like there's some new things in the food space, which I'm excited about. Even Molly Yeh, I love her TV show on the Food Network. Of course, the Chef's Table shows are so beautifully shot. Yeah, so many fun shows.
Awesome. Yeah, we watch a lot of food shows on our podcast.
Yeah, what are your favorite shows? I want to hear.
Oh my gosh. Right now we're watching Rick Martinez's Sweet Heat on YouTube. We loved like Nadia Bakes. We did love Great British Bake Off, of course, and Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Like that's how we're learning how to cook.
I love that. Even Stanley Tucci's new show is really good in Italy. I mean, I just love Italy, so it's fun to watch. But yes, of course, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. I just love that so much. That was beautiful.
Totally. All right. So we've got time for maybe one more question, and I'm going to ask, so your second cookbook was The Forest Feast for Kids. What tips do you have for getting little ones involved in the kitchen?
Yeah, so I think I've found that the kids are much more apt to try things that they've had a part in making, especially a part in growing, if you can make that happen, even if it's just like herbs in a little pot on your windowsill. If they kind of watch something grow, they're much more apt to eat it. But certainly in cooking, so like we take our kids to the farmer's market, and I find that if I let them choose an item that they've, maybe we don't have very often or they've never tried before, but if they get to choose it at the farmer's market and then we go home and we try to figure out how to make it in a way that would be tasty to them, they're much more apt to try it. I was sprinkling cinnamon on roasted vegetables, like cinnamon and butter on some vegetables the other night, and that kind of got them to try it. But for really little kids, like maybe under 5, there's this great cutter that it's the best kind of kid chopping tool I found. It's called a crinkle cutter. I think it's got like a little handle and a blade that's not too sharp, but it's like wavy, like a just wavy blade, and the kid holds it and you push down to cut the items. But a lot of the kid knives that are plastic or whatever are not very strong at cutting tougher items like potatoes or carrots, and so this one will chop those, and it makes kind of like a fun design, so the little bits are kind of wavy looking. But getting them involved, we have one of those kitchen towers. It's like a wooden folding tower that the kid can stand on right at counter height and help, which kind of gets them closer to the action, which I think helps too. Dips I think are great, and giving lots of options. So like we'll do a taco night as like a weeknight dinner, and I'll put like all the toppings in lots of different bowls, and I'm always like putting stuff that I'm like, oh, I don't think they're going to try that one, but I'll just put it out there. And if one of the kids tries it, the other ones are much more apt to try it. So every once in a while, they surprise me by all trying something that I didn't think anyone was going to put on their plate. But then the other thing is just making it colorful. I think kids are much more apt to try things when it's really pretty and colorful. We made a beet hummus, that's in the book. And it's, they like hummus with carrots. But if you add some beets in the blender with the hummus, it makes it pink. And I think they're more apt to try it because it's like a fun color. The other time that I find is a good like window for getting them to eat vegetables is right before dinner. I feel like they're always hungry about half an hour before dinner. They're like starving, right? They want everything. And that's when I put out the hummus and the crudité, the vegetables. I'll put like celery sticks, cucumber sticks, carrots, whatever, but with like a hummus or something a little healthier. And because they're so hungry, they will actually eat it. Whereas if I put it out, if they had some other like pretzels or some other snack at that time, and then I put out the healthy stuff at dinner, they're not quite as hangry, so they won't try it. So try to get your little appetizer plate of vegetables can do the trick sometimes.
I want pink hummus. That sounds amazing.
It's more fun.
This is from Narwhal Ghost again. They ask any advice for people aspiring to get into the cookbook or blogging space.
Sure. So my process, my first bit of advice is just do it. Just start putting up content. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think just start. Like when I started my blog, if you go way back 10 years ago to when I first started it, and you look at my first like 2 or 3 posts, I had no idea what I was doing. It took me blogging and putting things online to kind of get my juices flowing and get me to the place that I was going to be more successful creatively. So I think just doing it and getting it up there and not worrying about who's going to see it or if it's perfect enough. But so my process was I started a Tumblr a million years ago in like 2011, and I started posting photos. That sort of morphed into a blog, and now it's just really a website. So I started as a blog, as a way of posting. I think, obviously the blogosphere has changed a lot since then, but I think now there's so many opportunities for people, of course, in social media, which was really just like Instagram was pretty new when I was starting my blog. But I think don't worry about what everyone else wants to see and just post what is really interesting to you. And I think your audience will find you. So try to get the visuals good. I think, all the platforms are so visual these days that if you can have some sort of cohesive look to what you're sharing, think about like the color palette. Are all the photos that you're sharing sort of in a warm color palette? Are they all in a cool color palette? Like, are you photographing things outdoors? In terms of like the visuals for me, I try to alternate kind of like wide shots with close-up shots. If you look at the kind of color palette on my, say, Instagram, there's a lot of like warm tones and greens. And that just happens to be what I'm drawn to. But after a while, I think when you just get started and you start posting things, then you'll start to see your style come out and you can be like, oh, that is emerging as my style. So I'm going to start doing more of that. So I think really just start posting. And even if you don't know what your area of focus is, just choose what you think it might be. Or your favorite at this moment, and start, if you're like really into ice cream, just start posting ice cream. And that doesn't mean that you can't shift to cupcakes, in a month or whatever. So I think sometimes it's just doing it helps you kind of get going. Does that make sense? Do what you love and the people will find you, basically.
That makes perfect sense. All right, Erin, we are going to wrap it up now. Can you let everybody know where they can find you on the internet?
Sure. So my website is theforestfeast.com. Forest has one R. On Instagram, I'm at The Forest Feast. On TikTok, I'm just at Forest Feast. But I have a newsletter that goes out about twice a month that's free that you can sign up on my website. I send new recipes and recipe roundups, and I announce different events and classes I'm doing and different products I'm making. I do a lot of, I put my artwork on a lot of things like clothing and tablecloths I'm working on right now, like a table linen line. But anyways, anytime I'm working on something, I announce it in my newsletter. So that's a good way to find me. And of course on Facebook, I'm just The Forest Feast. So those are the main channels that I'm most active on.
Excellent. And I'm Justine, and that's Meg. And we are Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes Podcast. And you can find us on your favorite podcatcher or go to podappetitpodcast.com, where we release new episodes every other Monday. And you can even find previous AMA talks there in our feed as well. And we'll be back very soon with another AMA talk here. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you. This is fun.
Thanks for listening to Pod Appétit Gourmet Takes.
We'd love to hear from you, so find us on Twitter and Instagram at pod_appétit.
And on Facebook at Pod Appétit Podcast.
You can also email us at podappetitpodcast@gmail.com and find all of our episodes on our website, podappetitpodcast.com.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Sarah, and we are the Homance Chronicles.
The Homance Chronicles is an adult comedy podcast where we laugh like this all of the time at our real life. It's what happens, where we talk about everything from dating disasters
to poor choices after drinking entirely way too much.
We always drink too much.
That's a terrible thing.
It leads to awkward encounters.
Both sober and drunk, though.
True.
That's very true.
The Twilight Zone is real. It's the ultimate girl talk where we share everything. Even
everything. Butt stuff.
Yeah, all the stuff. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search the Homance Chronicles. And if you haven't figured it out, Homance is the girl version of a bromance. So get ready to giggle along.